Pay attention to the woman in the gray peacoat walking toward the metro station. Her name is Rachel Cho. She's 26 years old, a junior architect at a downtown firm, and she's carrying a cardboard tube containing blueprints for her first solo project. She's been working on this presentation for 3 weeks. Tonight, she'll rehearse it one more time before tomorrow's client meeting. Now, pay attention to the man standing near the platform entrance, checking his phone. His name is Emmanuel Okafor. He's 38 years old, originally from Lagos, Nigeria. He's been in the United States for 9 years. He works as a night shift supervisor at a packaging facility. He has no criminal record. To anyone watching, he appears to be waiting for a train. He is not waiting for a train. At 6:47 p.m. on October 23rd, Rachel Cho descended the stairs into Gallery Place Station. Security cameras captured her swiping her card, moving through the turnstile, and walking toward the Red Line platform. Emmanuel Okafor entered the station 40 seconds later. He did not swipe a card. He jumped the turnstile while the attendant was helping an elderly passenger. Within 3 hours, Rachel's phone would be turned off forever. This was not a chance encounter. It was a carefully planned abduction. Rachel Cho had moved to Washington, D.C. 14 months earlier, accepting a position at Morrison & Associates Architecture. She lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbia Heights, a neighborhood she'd chosen for its proximity to the metro and its mixture of young professionals and longtime residents. Her routine was predictable. She left for work at 7:30 a.m. She returned between 6:30 and 7 o'clock p.m. On Wednesdays, she stopped at the Whole Foods on P Street. On Sundays, she called her parents in Seattle. Her Instagram feed showed sketches of buildings, photos of her morning coffee, occasional selfies with coworkers. The posts were professional, carefully curated. Rachel was building a portfolio, not sharing her personal life. Her last post, uploaded at 4:15 p.m. on October 23rd, showed the cardboard tube of blueprints with the caption, "Ready or not, here I come. First big pitch tomorrow." By the time her colleagues saw that post, Rachel had already vanished. Emmanuel Okafor had noticed Rachel 6 weeks earlier. He worked the overnight shift, 11 p.m. to 7 o'clock a.m., which meant his commute home coincided with the morning rush. He'd seen her on the platform multiple times. She always stood in the same spot, always carried a leather messenger bag, always wore headphones. He began adjusting his schedule, leaving work early to take the evening train instead. He began following her home. Security footage from multiple metro stations would later confirm he trailed her at least 8 times over a 3-week period. He stayed 2 or 3 cars behind. He exited at her stop. He maintained distance. He was learning her patterns, her routine, her vulnerabilities. On October 23rd, he made his move. Rachel exited the metro at Columbia Heights at 6:52 p.m. The station was moderately crowded. She climbed the escalator, emerged onto 14th Street, and began the 6-block walk to her apartment. Street cameras captured her passing the giant food at 6:55 p.m., turning onto Irving Street at 6:57 p.m. Emmanuel Okafor was visible in the same footage, maintaining a consistent distance of 30 to 40 feet. At 7:02 p.m., Rachel reached her building. She used her key fob to access the lobby. The door closed behind her. Emmanuel Okafor did not attempt to follow her inside. Instead, he walked to the building's side alley and waited. What happened next would not be captured on any camera. Rachel's building had 24 units across 4 floors. Her apartment, 3C, faced the alley. The building had a secured front entrance, but no doorman, no security guard, no cameras in the interior hallways. The back exit, used primarily for trash removal, had a faulty lock that residents had been complaining about for months. Management kept promising to fix it. They never did. At 7:18 p.m., Rachel's next-door neighbor, Mr. Chen, heard what he described as a brief scuffle and a woman's voice saying, "What are you doing?" Then silence. He assumed it was a domestic dispute and did not investigate. He would later tell police this decision haunted him. At 7:45 p.m., Rachel's best friend, Maya Patel, sent a text, "Good luck tomorrow. You're going to kill it." The message was delivered, but never read. At 9:30 p.m., Maya called. The call went straight to voicemail. Rachel's phone had been turned off. At 10:15 p.m., Maya called again, then again at 10:47 p.m. By 11:00 p.m., she was genuinely worried. Rachel always responded. Always. Maya knew her friend's habits, knew her dedication to her work, knew she'd be up late rehearsing. The silence was wrong. At 11:34 p.m., Maya drove to Rachel's apartment and knocked on the door. No answer. She called the building manager, who reluctantly agreed to conduct a wellness check. When he opened the door to 3C, the apartment was dark and empty. Rachel's messenger bag sat on the kitchen counter. Her laptop was open on the dining table, showing her presentation slides. Her keys and wallet were on the counter beside her bag. The cardboard tube containing her blueprints lay on the floor near the door, slightly crushed. Rachel Cho was gone. The Metropolitan Police Department classified Rachel as a missing person at 12:47 a.m. on October 24th. Detective Lorraine Bishop caught the case. She was a 16-year veteran of the Major Case Division, specializing in abductions and missing persons. She arrived at Rachel's apartment at 1:30 a.m. The scene told a clear story. Rachel had entered her apartment, set down her belongings, and likely begun preparing for her presentation. She had not changed out of her work clothes. She had not eaten dinner. The struggle, if there was one, had been brief and contained near the doorway. There were no signs of forced entry through the front door. Detective Bishop immediately focused on the building's rear exit. The door's lock was broken. Anyone could have entered from the alley. The question was, how did the perpetrator know which apartment was Rachel's? The answer would emerge from security footage. Bishop's team pulled video from every camera within a 3-block radius of Rachel's building. They tracked her journey from the metro station to her front door. They identified Emmanuel Okafor following her. They traced his movements back through multiple dates, confirming the pattern of stalking. By 9:00 a.m. on October 24th, Detective Bishop had a suspect. She did not yet have a location. Emmanuel Okafor had not reported for his shift at the packaging facility on the night of October 23rd. His supervisor described this as unusual, but not unprecedented. Okafor occasionally called out sick. His attendance record was generally good. The supervisor provided his address, a basement apartment in Tacoma Park, Maryland. At 11:15 a.m., Detective Bishop and 4 officers executed a search warrant at Okafor's residence. The apartment was sparsely furnished: a mattress on the floor, a small television, a table with 2 chairs. The refrigerator contained mostly beer and takeout containers. The bathroom was cluttered but functional. The bedroom closet told a different story. Inside, investigators found a collection of photographs. All were of women. All appeared to have been taken without the subject's knowledge. On metro platforms, walking on sidewalks, entering buildings. Rachel Cho appeared in 37 photographs. There were 4 other women represented in the collection, none of whom had been reported missing. Beneath the photographs, detectives found a spiral notebook. The handwriting was meticulous, organized by date. Okafor had documented Rachel's routine in exhaustive detail. Her arrival and departure times, her clothing choices, the routes she walked, the coffee shop she occasionally visited on Saturday mornings. The final entry, dated October 23rd, consisted of 2 words: tonight, ready. Emmanuel Okafor was not at the apartment. His car, a 2008 Honda Civic, was not in the parking lot. Neighbors reported seeing him leave the previous evening around 6:00 p.m. He had not returned. The search was on. Rachel's parents, David and Susan Cho, arrived in Washington from Seattle on the afternoon of October 24th. Susan had spoken to her daughter 3 days earlier. Rachel had been excited about her presentation, nervous about the client meeting, hopeful about her future. Susan replayed that conversation obsessively, searching for clues she'd missed, warnings she'd failed to hear. There were none. Rachel had sounded happy. David Cho was a software engineer, methodical and analytical. He began creating spreadsheets, tracking police updates, organizing the search efforts that were already forming among Rachel's friends and co-workers. He needed to do something, anything, to feel useful. The alternative, sitting still, waiting, hoping, was unbearable. Maya Patel posted Rachel's photograph on every social media platform. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of people shared the post. Tips began flooding the police department's hotline. Most were well-intentioned, but useless. Someone who thought they'd seen Rachel at a grocery store. Someone who had a psychic vision. Someone who wanted to help, but had no information. One tip, however, changed everything. At 3:47 p.m. on October 24th, a gas station attendant in Laurel, Maryland, called the tip line. He'd seen the news coverage. He remembered a man matching Emmanuel Okafor's description, purchasing zip ties, duct tape, and a large blue tarp the previous evening around 8:30 p.m. The man had paid cash. The attendant remembered because the purchases seemed odd, and because the man had been visibly nervous, repeatedly checking his phone. The gas station security footage confirmed the identification. Emmanuel Okafor had been there. His Honda Civic was visible in the frame. The timestamp was 8:34 p.m., less than 90 minutes after Rachel had arrived home. Detective Bishop now had a timeline and a direction. Okafor had abducted Rachel, driven to Laurel to purchase supplies, and then continued to an unknown location. The question was, where? The answer came from traffic cameras. Okafor's vehicle was captured on Route 1, heading south at 9:15 p.m. It was spotted again on Route 4 near Upper Marlboro at 9:48 p.m. The final sighting was on a rural road near the Patuxent River at 10:23 p.m. After that, the trail went cold. Detective Bishop studied maps of the area. The region was heavily wooded, dotted with abandoned properties, boat launches, and isolated fishing cabins. It would take dozens of officers and multiple days to search thoroughly. Time was the enemy. Every hour that passed reduced the likelihood of finding Rachel alive. At 6:20 p.m. on October 24th, the FBI joined the investigation. Special Agent Marcus Trent brought additional resources: helicopter surveillance, cadaver dogs, and a behavioral analysis unit. The case was now a federal priority. The search focused on a 12-square-mile area along the Patuxent River. Teams worked through the night, using thermal imaging and search dogs. The woods were dense, the terrain difficult. Every abandoned structure had to be checked. Every trail explored. At 2:17 a.m. on October 25th, a K-9 unit alerted near an old hunting cabin 3 miles from the main road. The structure was dilapidated, surrounded by overgrowth. Okafor's Honda Civic was parked behind the building, partially concealed by fallen branches. Detective Bishop and Agent Trent approached with weapons drawn. The cabin door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and human waste. A battery-powered lantern cast shadows across the single room. Rachel Cho was zip-tied to a metal bed frame in the corner. She was alive. Barely. Rachel was conscious but unable to speak. Her wrists and ankles bore deep ligature marks. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from dehydration. She was still wearing the gray peacoat from the surveillance footage, now torn and filthy. When paramedics cut the zip ties, she began shaking uncontrollably. Emmanuel Okafor was not in the cabin. Fresh tire tracks suggested he'd left recently, possibly within the past 2 hours. A manhunt was launched immediately. State police set up roadblocks. Helicopters scanned the surrounding woods. Every officer in Maryland received Okafor's photograph and vehicle description. Rachel was transported to Prince George's Hospital Center. Doctors treated her for dehydration, hypothermia, and numerous contusions. Physically, she would recover. The psychological damage would take years to process. Detective Bishop waited until the following afternoon to interview her. Rachel's voice was hoarse, her hands trembling, but she wanted to tell her story. She needed to tell it. Okafor had entered her apartment through the back door while she was reviewing her presentation slides. He'd moved silently, waited until she stood to stretch, then grabbed her from behind. She'd tried to scream. He'd covered her mouth, whispered that if she stayed quiet, he wouldn't hurt her. She'd believed him. She'd been wrong. He'd bound her hands with zip ties, duct taped her mouth, and walked her down the back stairs to his car in the alley. The entire abduction took less than 3 minutes. No one saw them leave. The drive to the cabin had taken over an hour. Okafor had not spoken during the journey. When they arrived, he'd zip-tied her to the bed frame and left. He returned several hours later with the supplies from the gas station. He'd told her he wasn't going to hurt her. He just wanted company. He was lonely. Rachel described him as calm, methodical, disconnected. He'd brought her water, but no food. He'd sat in a chair across the room, staring at her for hours, occasionally speaking in fragmented sentences about his life, his struggles, his isolation. He'd spoken about Nigeria, about his family, about feeling invisible in America. Rachel had listened, nodded when he seemed to want acknowledgement, stayed silent when he fell into brooding silences. On the second night, he'd told her he needed to leave for a few hours. He would return. She should wait quietly. If she screamed, no one would hear her anyway. He'd left 90 minutes before police arrived. Emmanuel Okafor was apprehended at 4:15 p.m. on October 25th at a bus station in Baltimore. He'd purchased a ticket to New York City under his own name. He had $340 in cash, a duffel bag containing clothes, and Rachel's driver's license in his wallet. He did not resist arrest. When Detective Bishop asked him why he'd taken Rachel, he said he'd wanted someone to talk to. When asked why he'd chosen her specifically, he said she looked kind. When asked if he'd planned to release her, he said he didn't know. He hadn't thought that far ahead. The interrogation lasted 7 hours. Okafor's attorney advised him to remain silent, but Okafor seemed compelled to explain himself. He described a life of profound loneliness, working overnight shifts, sleeping during the day, having no friends, no romantic relationships, no community. He'd tried church groups, community centers, online dating. Nothing worked. He felt invisible, disconnected, forgotten. He'd started following women on the metro as a way to feel connected to someone, anyone. Rachel had smiled at a stranger once on the platform, a small kindness directed at an elderly man struggling with luggage. Okafor had witnessed this moment. He decided she was the one. Psychologists would later diagnose him with severe depression, social anxiety, and attachment disorder. They would note his immigration trauma, his cultural dislocation, his untreated mental illness. They would acknowledge these factors contributed to his actions. They would also note he'd stalked Rachel for 6 weeks. He'd planned the abduction. He'd purchased restraints in advance. He'd known the cabin's location before taking her. His actions, however influenced by mental illness, had been calculated and deliberate. Emmanuel Okafor was charged with kidnapping, unlawful restraint, stalking, and assault. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The trial began on March 12th of the following year. The prosecution presented the surveillance footage, the photographs from his apartment, the notebook documenting Rachel's routine, the receipts from the gas station. They called Rachel to testify. She described the abduction, the cabin, the 41 hours of captivity. Her voice was steady, her testimony devastating. The defense argued diminished capacity. They presented Okafor's mental health records, testimony from immigration trauma specialists, evidence of his isolation and untreated illness. They portrayed him as a profoundly broken man who'd committed a terrible act but lacked the criminal intent required for conviction. Assistant District Attorney Sharon Kimball was direct in her closing statement. Okafor's suffering was real, but suffering does not grant permission to harm others. Mental illness may explain behavior. It does not excuse it. Rachel Cho had done nothing wrong. She had smiled at a stranger, lived her life, pursued her dreams. For that, she'd been stalked, abducted, and traumatized. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. They found Emmanuel Okafor guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 32 years in prison without possibility of parole for 25 years. Rachel Cho did not return to Morrison & Associates. She could not bring herself to take the metro, to walk alone at night, to live in her apartment. She moved back to Seattle 3 months after the trial ended. She worked with a therapist specializing in trauma. She joined a support group for kidnapping survivors. 2 years later, she began designing again. Her first project was a community center for immigrant and refugee mental health services in South Seattle. The building featured large windows, open spaces, and multiple exits. Every design choice prioritized safety, visibility, and connection. The center opened in 2024. It was named the Cho Foundation Center for Belonging. Rachel rarely discusses what happened to her. When she does, she emphasizes what she survived, not what was done to her. She speaks at conferences on stalking prevention. She advocates for better security in residential buildings, improved mental health services for immigrants, and stronger legal protections for stalking victims. The cardboard tube containing her blueprints was recovered from the cabin. The blueprints were water-damaged and torn. Rachel had them framed anyway. They hang in her office in Seattle, a reminder of what she almost lost and what she fought to reclaim. David and Susan Cho established a scholarship fund for young architects from immigrant families. Maya Patel became a vocal advocate for stalking awareness. Detective Lorraine Bishop retired in 2023, but she keeps Rachel's photo on her desk, not the crime scene photo. The one from Rachel's Instagram, the blueprint, the caption about being ready, the hope for the future. Rachel Cho survived. That is what matters most. She was 26 years old when she was taken. She is 31 now. She is building again. She is living again. She is reclaiming every moment that was stolen from her. Those moments belong to her. They always have.